this flight wasn't going anywhere near the Atlantic jet stream. It was ploughing its way across the Bay of Bengal, where the jet stream actually is much lighter, but what we had there were violent thunderstorms. Thunderstorms themselves can cause huge amounts of turbulence, but normally with thunderstorms, the pilot can see out of his cockpit exactly where they are and can avoid them. And obviously he has radar displays as well. So the curiosity about this incident is that one would expect the pilot to have seen where the thunderstorms were and how to avoid them.
The nightmare became reality yesterday. As you know, severe turbulence on a London to Singapore flight resulted in dozens of injuries and also, tragically, the death of 73-year-old Jeffrey Kitchen. The plane fell thousands of feet in just a few seconds. Andrew Davis was on the plane. He's been speaking to Times Radio.
It's so difficult to kind of be specific about it to recall because it all happened so quickly. But it only felt like a few seconds of falling. I mean, I guess the best way to describe it is like one of those awful fairground rides where they crank you up and then on a chair and then suddenly drop you. Except this time we had absolutely no warning, so there's no anticipation. As I think back to it, I recall the pull on my waist from the seat belt, which obviously can save me from injury, so that's a good thing. Lots of flooding and screaming, and I don't actually even recall if the lights went out or what happened. I do vaguely remember it being dark, so maybe the lights did go out.
You can hear that full interview after 6 o'clock on Times Radio Breakfast. Andrew there's talking about his seatbelt. Captain Chris Hammond is a retired pilot, a member of the British Airlines Pilot Association. He stressed to Times Radio, this shows the importance of staying strapped in.
We keep our seatbelts fastened on the flight deck, and so should you back there, just in case this sort of thing happens. It can happen very, very quickly if you run into some turbulence, but that's part of the pilot's training to recognise the symptoms of what could be about to happen. But occasionally, you just can't tell. It just happens. And if you're not strapped in, the cabin crew didn't appear to know because the meals went everywhere. So that must have been very, very sudden.
And very frightening for everyone on board. Well, trying to determine the causes is tricky. We know turbulence and how to predict it is, as we've just heard from Chris, sometimes tricky. The meteorologist from Weather Trending, John Hammond, is here. John, good morning.
Morning, Rosie.
Just explain, from your experience, what type of turbulence was this?
Do you know what? This is a really good question, and the flight investigators are going to have to get to the bottom of this. There are various types of turbulence at play with these long-haul jet airliners. The main two are what's called clear air turbulence, and that tends to happen, as the name suggests, in completely clear air with not thunderstorms or anything like that. Clear blue skies, and then huge amounts of wind shear, which take place just on the edges of the jet stream. Now, that's common or garden clear air turbulence, which occurs on any transatlantic flight, for example, because flights are running the gauntlet with the jet stream. The jet stream actually helps to carry airlines quicker from west to east across the Atlantic. So sometimes when we get on an aeroplane in New York, we can arrive in London much quicker than scheduled, and that's because we're riding on the jet stream. The catch with that is that on the edge of the jet stream, you get, as I say, clear air turbulence, which causes large amounts of shear. Shear is a dramatic change in wind speed of the jet stream over a very short space of time. That leads to huge amounts of deceleration and acceleration, and that can cause the bumpy ride, which we quite often encounter, for example, on a transatlantic flight. Now, this flight wasn't going anywhere near the Atlantic jet stream. It was ploughing its way across the Bay of Bengal, where the jet stream actually is much lighter, but what we had there were violent thunderstorms. Thunderstorms themselves can cause huge amounts of turbulence, but normally with thunderstorms, the pilot can see out of his cockpit exactly where they are and can avoid them. And obviously he has radar displays as well. So the curiosity about this incident is that one would expect the pilot to have seen where the thunderstorms were and how to avoid them. So it's going to be very, very interesting to find out exactly what went on with the cockpit recorder as to whether there was some sort of technological malfunction which meant that the pilot couldn't actually get all the information he needed to avoid these huge thunderstorms.
Because what we're hearing is it was just seconds that the seatbelt light went on from then the turbulence starting, and that the plane fell, well, thousands of feet in just a few seconds. Are there some areas then, John, that are more prone to turbulence like this than others? Some kind of flight routes that would be more vulnerable?
Absolutely. I mean, this is a vulnerable route to thunderstorms, particularly at this time of year. The monsoon is heading its way northwards through the Bay of Bengal. We've got very frequent, lively, active, hugely energetic thunderstorms on a daily basis across this part of the world, Rosie. And the pilot will have been well aware that he was likely to encounter these sorts of storms on this particular flight route. So that is an area at this time of year which is prone to, let's call it, a bumpy ride. But there's a world of difference between a bumpy ride, which, any of us who've been on a plane, we're used to that sort of thing, aren't we?
Yeah, and what happened yesterday was clearly extraordinary.
And that's what makes this incident so interesting, as to just why it was so dramatically more extreme. And I sitting here in Buckinghamshire, cannot give you the answer to that. The flight recording information will go in depth into exactly what happened, the sorts of forces that were at play on that plane. Planes, are incredibly robust, given the gargantuan forces at play at 30, 40,000 feet up there. You've got winds of 100, 200 miles an hour, which can suddenly accelerate and decelerate over a very short space of time. That puts huge forces on aeroplanes. Aeroplanes are very robustly built. And the fact that we're talking about this just shows how rare it is for such an extreme incident to occur. Now, turbulence, so the climate scientists suggest, is likely to increase with a warming world, because we'll have stronger jet streams, we'll have greater forces at play at 40,000 feet. So we can expect bumpier rides in the future, but that does not mean to say that this sort of incident is going to suddenly become more frequent. So this is going to be a very interesting test case in terms of what went on this flight and the implications for other flights jetting around the world in the future, and whether this is something we might have to expect more frequently in the future due to climate change.
John Hammond, thank you very much, the meteorologist from Weather Trending, explaining what we know of what happened yesterday and why more turbulence might be ahead. Absolutely terrifying. There sort of isn't another word, really. People on the plane were saying yesterday the seatbelt sign went on, and then within seconds the turbulence hit. I mean, there's so many different stories in the paper. The Mail, I think, aptly just puts it as nightmare.
We've had so many stories lately, haven't we, where someone was to blame, there was a cover-up, and righteous indignation is now bringing that to the fore. The interesting thing on this story, one of the interesting things, is this tragedy doesn't appear to have been preventable, doesn't appear to have been anybody's fault. It's just one of those awful things. It's rare that you get turbulence quite this bad, and it does seem from all the aviation experts I've been reading that this was clear air turbulence, which is almost impossible to predict. And the fact that the put your seatbelt on warning was so close to the point where the plane, it went up first, didn't it, and then down really sharply. And the fact that all the cabin crew were on their feet serving, and they've all been injured. I mean, it does just bring home the fact that, I mean, I'm sure you've been on flights where they've said, we recommend you keep your seatbelt fastened loosely, even when you're sitting in the plane, because it seems that everyone that had done that escaped the serious injury. It was the people that were not strapped into their seats that then hit the ceiling, and that's where a lot of the injuries occurred.
Yeah, it is the best but most awful advert to wear your seatbelt, if there ever was one.